everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending TalentQuest's webinar today on self-awareness and leadership impact. My name is Dina Klosik, and I'm a member of the communications team here at TalentQuest. And we're really excited to spend the next hour with you discussing self-awareness and its impact on leadership. After the presentation, we will have some time for a brief question and answer session. If you do have any questions, please use the box that appears at the right-hand top corner of your screen to send in your questions. Also, after the webinar, we will be emailing you a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the recording. So without further ado, let's get started today. Our presenter today is Dr. Jody Bradham, Executive Consultant here at TalentQuest. Jody is a psychologist with over 20 years of experience in the people business, having worked with organizations large and small. He has some great information to share with you guys today. I'd like to turn the presentation over to Jody and welcome him. Welcome, Jody.
Hey, thanks, Dina, and thank you all for making a decision to spend some time with me this afternoon. I'm looking forward to talking with you about self-awareness and the role it plays in increasing leadership impact. And as Dina mentioned, I hope you find the information useful. And I am looking forward to a question or two at the end as well, so we'll make sure to allow plenty of time to accommodate that. But this self-awareness is a topic that's near and dear to me because it's so relevant to not only our day-to-day lives, but from a leadership and organizational development standpoint, it's just been made apparent to me over the years how critical it is. And so when I was thinking about a title for this presentation, this saying came to mind: "It's not you, it's me." Well, it's interesting because I'm sure we've all heard this comment or perhaps even said this comment before in our lives. And the irony there is that when we've said it or when it's been said to us, usually it's been as a strategy to get out of a relationship that's not working well for whatever reason. But over the years, I've come to appreciate that more times than not, there's a good bit of truth in that statement, that most of the time it's not you. It really may have something to do with me. And as we'll see in a bit, that's where both the problem, perhaps, and the opportunity lies. And so as we kind of jump into the presentation, I want to start with brief little history here. So going back about 8,000 years, it was first discovered in Turkey. This was polished volcanic rock that they found had some interesting properties. And I won't elaborate on those properties just yet, but and it was a couple thousand years later over in Egypt, they found other forms of rock and earthen material could also be made and manipulated to have similar properties, so much so that they used this discovery to symbolize sun and light and life. But they also believed that this had magical properties, such as the ability to look back in time. And they considered this discovery a symbol of the inner self. And if we kind of follow the timeline as recently, relatively speaking, as 2,000 years BC, in China, we saw new forms, perhaps, and different materials used. We're now introducing the use of metals into this discovery. But it was still considered to have the same magical properties associated with it. And further, this was a discovery that was believed to give you the ability to see oneself as you are. And then moving over to Central and South America, again, this discovery gave you the ability for self-contemplation. And you probably saw on the screen there, the discovery that I'm referring to is, of course, the mirror. And so it's interesting that going back 8,000 years, what was an accidental discovery at first has now been captured and used over and over again over the years, such that today we've got any number of uses for a mirror. But most importantly, the magical properties ascribed to a mirror still hold true today, where we still believe that the mirror gives us the ability to look back in time. It also gives us the chance to really look at our inner selves and see who we are as we are, which is a tool for self-contemplation. Today, though, on a more practical level, the mirror's primary use, for me at least, is to make sure that when I walk out the house, my tie's on straight. and making sure that I'm presenting the brand that I want to be presenting to the world. And what I mean by that is the mirror can serve as a chance for me to make sure that what I'm putting out to the world is consistent with what I want to be seen by the world. And literally speaking, using a mirror to help me do that is part of the self-awareness journey here. Now, as we go forward, so metaphorically speaking, if we think the mirror gives us the means for self-reflection and self-awareness, we got to think about what would be the motive. Well, I draw on a few quotes to help me with the motive here, and one of them is this ancient proverb here: if you meet 3 jerks in one day, you're the jerk. Well, clearly jerk was probably a translation from an ancient time there, but the quote is still relevant and powerful nonetheless. And then we see this quote from Socrates: let him who would move the world first move himself. And finally, from Carl Jung, one of the founding fathers of psychology: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And that quote really kind of captures the "it's not you, it's me" sentiment there, is that when we are in relationships of any kind, those relationships are informative about us. And the more we can understand what's being revealed about us, the more we can leverage that for greater impact. So the mirror gives us the means, and these proverbs and quotations give us the motive to talk and to really understand about self-awareness. Because at the end of the day, what the mirrors and proverbs tell us is that we are often the source as well as the solution to our own problems. And as it relates to moving forward, any efforts to impact those around us necessarily starts with a need to understand and impact ourselves first. And after all, impacting those around us really is what leadership is all about. And so in order to do this and to do it effectively, we really do need to be self-aware. All right, so what is self-awareness? When we're talking about this, there are a lot of different definitions out there, but I'm going to share how I've broken it down, and then I'll give you some insights from some of the other experts out there. When I think about self-awareness, I think there's really 2 forms. There's an external or public self-awareness, and then there's an internal, and some call it a private self-awareness. External self-awareness refers to this: the ability to understand how we're perceived by others. And it's the ability to understand the degree to which our impact matches our intent. So if I go back to the slide earlier with the clown and the Superman outfit, this intent and impact matching is a reflection of, as a leader, I'm presenting a certain leadership brand to the rest of the world. And I come into a day at work, or I come into a team meeting with the expectation and the desire to come across and to present and have a certain impact. But when that impact misses, I need to be able to recognize that, and then I need to better understand why that is and course correct for that. So that external self-awareness is really being able to understand how we're perceived by others and the degree to which our intent and our impact match. On the internal side, or on the private side, self-awareness refers to this: the ability to understand our own strengths and our weaknesses. What are we good at? What are we not so good at? But the ability to understand our beliefs, feelings, motives, needs, and attitudes, and I would say even our values, is also part of that internal self-awareness. And not just understanding those things, but understanding how they influence our decisions and our behaviors from one moment to the next. And so if we look at external self-awareness and internal self-awareness, all of those represent self-awareness, but I would propose to you that the external self-awareness is really the easier of the 2 for folks to build and to focus on, especially for leaders. It's that internal self-awareness that can be more challenging for folks, and yet it's that same internal self-awareness where we can get the most impact from a leadership standpoint. Well, those are my definitions. I want to share with you some others' definitions just for a variety of definitions, but I'm also wanting to share with you a couple of resources that are just good resources. Travis Bradberry and Gene Graves here, their Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a great book for those of you that aren't familiar with it. But they define self-awareness as this: the ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment and understand yourself across situations. That key piece there is to understand yourself in the moment. If we look at Daniel Goleman, one of the founding fathers of emotional intelligence, he calls self-awareness the ability to be aware of and understand our own feelings. The authors here, Bill Joyner and Stephen Josephs, from their book Leadership Agility, they say it's the quality of attention and reflection you bring to your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And last, I'll share this resource with you for those that aren't familiar, Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. They take self-awareness and kind of define it coming from the opposite direction. They say a lack of self-awareness is exemplified when we have the problem of not being able to see that we have a problem. And they call that kind of being in the box. And for those of you that are willing to be challenged yourself as it relates to self-awareness and your own leadership impact, let me recommend this book for you, Leadership and Self-Deception. It's a great read. It's got great messages in it, but it also is very thought-provoking for those of us in leadership positions. But you get a sense for the definition of self-awareness and how it can have somewhat of a malleable definition, but the consistency is in understanding who we are and why we do what we do from one minute to the next from an internal perspective, not necessarily from an external or situationally based perspective. Now, many folks will still believe that things like self-awareness is still one of those soft skills. It's an HR touchy-feely thing, and we've got more important business to take care of. So let's focus on the real bottom line things and not talk about these soft skills. But the truth of the matter is that this soft skill in particular has a direct correlation and connection with effective bottom line performance. And just to kind of exemplify that briefly with two research examples, I'll share this first one from Korn Ferry. This was published just a few years ago when they looked at across 486 companies. There's roughly 6,000 different managers, leaders, executives that they assessed. And what they did is they tracked stock performance of these companies over a 30-month period. And they tried to correlate or to see if there was a correlation between those leaders who had greater self-awareness and the financial performance of the companies. And in fact, they did find that correlation. They found that poorly performing companies' employees had 20% more blind spots than the financially strong companies. Blind spots representing a gap in self-awareness, an example of where intent and impact may not have matched. And over that same 30-month period, those companies with a greater percentage of self-aware employees consistently outperformed those other companies. And so, this is just one study, but it's an interesting study with a pretty good sample size here that shows a direct correlation between self-awareness and financial bottom line. Now, if we compare that to a study done by Green Peak Partners recently in partnership with Cornell University, they looked at a smaller number of executives, but the industries, again, were wide-ranging and varied from as small as $50 million in annual revenues to $5 billion in annual revenues. And they, too, found that a high self-awareness score was the strongest predictor of overall success in driving results in managing talent. And what's interesting about this study is that they not only connected the dots between self-awareness and driving financial performance, but they brought in the managing talent piece as well. And for those of you in the talent management space and the HR field, you know that the costs associated with talent management can be extremely high, especially if we're having to remediate or correct or put in stopgaps against ineffective talent management strategies or practices. So the takeaway there is we're seeing, just from these two examples, a direct connection between high self-awareness and strong financial performance, strong organizational performance, and in the case of the Green Peak study in particular, strong talent management opportunities going forward. Now, if we think kind of more broadly and come out of specific research studies, but aggregate the research and anecdotal experience, we can make the connection in a lot of other ways as well. So if we think about self-awareness is allowing me to have the capacity to understand both my strengths and my weaknesses. At a minimum, it allows me to be more strategic in building the team around me. And in fact, that's what we see with leaders who are most effective. Those leaders who are aware of their own blind spots very deliberately and intentionally choose leaders underneath them to augment and to support and to complement those blind spots. And in fact, research from Katzenbach and the way he defines teams really echoes this. A team, by definition, a small group of people working towards a shared and common purpose, but who bring complementary skills and abilities. And effective leaders who know where their strengths are and who know where their blind spots are will also in turn use that self-awareness to select and shape the team underneath them. And of course, we know from experience, strong teams lead to strong performance. Stability in vision, execution, and accountability. We also know that the more self-aware we are as leaders, we've heard the saying, if stand for something or you'll fall for anything. Well, when we have greater self-awareness about what our needs are, what our motives are, what our values are, it makes it a lot easier for us to remain stable and consistent in the vision we're trying to execute for our company, for our team, for our organization. And where there's clarity in vision and execution, the opportunities for accountability, both self-accountability and accountability of others, is also much easier and much more effective. Richard Branson, the famous serial entrepreneur, founder of Virgin and all of its subsidiary companies, echoed this sentiment pretty directly. He is, and has been a fan of self-awareness in his leadership approach, and gave an example of something that they did with Virgin Airlines, where their vision has always been to go against the grain and to offer the market something different than what everybody else has been offering, and that's been the secret to their success. They had some early difficulties with Virgin Airlines and some of the product offerings and some of the service models that they were using, and they stepped back, did some self-reflection on this, and realized that they had deviated away from what was most important to them in their values, i.e. being different than those already out in the market. And when they were able to recalibrate and be more in line with what their true needs, motives, values were, they were able to regroup, re-strategize, and realign on that vision. And they've seen tremendous success going forward. When it comes to decision making, this is another opportunity where, especially at senior leadership levels, your two primary responsibilities are to solve problems and to make decisions. And when we're making decisions, when we don't understand the internal factors that influence those decisions, we really are setting ourselves up for a negative outcome. For example, you can all think about in your own lives, when you've had a great day or when you're in a positive mood and somebody comes to you with a request, you know that you're more likely to respond in the affirmative to that request than if you've had a bad day, or if you're in a bad mood, or you've got a lot on your plate, or you're just stressed about things, in which case you're more likely to answer no. So rather than being able to assess the situation and the circumstances on its own merits, if we don't understand that A, emotions influence decisions, and B, how those emotions influence decisions, we very quickly can find ourselves on the negative outcome of a decision. Likewise, if we think about kind of open debate and conflict within teams and team environments, leaders who are more self-aware, in other words, they recognize what their strengths and weaknesses are, and they understand what they're feeling from one minute to the next, and they understand where their insecurities may be. They're also going to be more tolerant and more inviting of healthy debate and productive conflict as it relates to problem solving and decision making. Brand management. I mentioned this earlier with the slides with the clown and the Superman under his suit picture. Leaders, whether they intend to or not, leaders are presenting brands. And as with Denny's or Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, a brand is other people's perception of you. And the more consistent you can be in the way you present to the world around you, the more defined your brand will be. And so as we're trying to define an effective leadership brand, in order to be consistent in honoring that brand, we have to really understand what that brand is built upon. What are the needs? What are the values? What are the feelings going on from one minute to the next? And how can I leverage those, or how can I manage those so that they don't alter or force me to be inconsistent in my presentation to the external world? Leaders who are not aware of those internal factors, more times than not, will be seen by others as being inconsistent or reactive or unpredictable, or just not as consistent of a brand. Doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means that sometimes folks won't know what to expect from them. And that damages the leadership brand over time. And where there's a damaged brand, that impacts credibility and ultimately influence. Credibility comes from a standpoint of folks having a sense that you not only know what you're doing, but you know who you are, and you know what you're bringing to the table and what others need to bring in support of you, and you're open about that and willing to use that to advance the organization, rather than insecure about that and trying to hide that. Where there's credibility, there's more influence. And after all, we get back to the definition of leadership, and it's about influencing and impacting those around us. Where there's credibility and influence, and where there's effective self-awareness, the natural byproduct of that is that it allows and affords for more authenticity in our relationships with others. If I know myself truly, I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses, I know my blind spots, I know what I need from others, it allows me to simply present in a more genuine and authentic manner. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have to go around in full transparency disclosing everything I'm thinking and feeling all the time. But what it does mean is that when I am interacting with somebody, I'm able to actually be with that person rather than need from that person, if that makes any sense. And so that affords just more authenticity in the relationship. Where there's more authenticity, there's more likelihood of connecting in that relationship. Where there's more connection in the relationship, we're more likely to have loyalty and commitment from those on our team. And research has shown where there's more loyalty and commitment to our managers, we also see more engagement in those very same employees. So again, we start with a squishy, touchy-feely of being authentic in our relationships, and we very quickly can connect the dots to increased loyalty, lower turnover, and increased employee engagement, all very much relevant ROI numbers for an organization. And lastly, leaders who are willing to openly acknowledge and demonstrate belief in the value of self-awareness, and actually promote and are open about their own efforts to increase self-awareness, they're also sending a message and modeling for the rest of the culture the need to remain agile. And agility is critical in these times of constant change, these times where change is the norm for most companies. Those companies that are not agile and nimble and able to kind of ebb and flow and change as needed to meet market demands are going to be companies that struggle to be successful long term. Well, how do we maintain our agility? By definition, agility is the ability to take past experiences and learn from them in order to leverage them going forward. Well, if I'm the leader in charge of driving this change, then it would behoove me to make sure that I'm reflecting back on my own prior experiences, learning from that in order to increase my own impact, and then to model that for the organization from a cultural standpoint. Agility is about learning, and learning starts with self-awareness. Now, there are other connections, to be sure, and we could spend the whole hour just talking about how self-awareness is connected to leadership. But these are your big categories here, and you all probably have seen examples of where high self-aware leaders have benefited in these bullets, and you've also probably seen leaders who lack in self-awareness. and the consequence to that of that limited self-awareness. Which leads me to this next point here. If the research is so strong, and if anecdotal experience is so strong about the connection between self-awareness, high self-awareness, and leadership and organizational impact, why don't we see it more? Why are folks not always self-aware? And what can we do about that? Well, if we take it kind of one at a time, we can say that self-preservation is one of the reasons why we don't see more self-awareness automatically. And what I mean by self-preservation is simply drawn on, from a psychological standpoint, we are wired to follow our evolutionary roots. And going back to day one, more threats to our survival were coming from the outside than they were from the inside. And so it was to our advantage to be more naturally focused externally than internally. Now, as we've evolved and gotten more sophisticated, and we all have stories or people we know where we've destructed from the inside out, but we're still kind of working with a natural tendency to look outward rather than inward. And that is, and has been for the most part, for self-preservation's sake. Now, there's also a natural bias called the actor-observer bias. Some of you may be familiar with this, but this is a scenario where when it comes to explaining behavior, why people do what they do, typically when we're trying to explain the behavior of others, we will do so from a characteristic, or trait standpoint. When we try to describe our own behavior, we have a natural bias towards describing it situationally. So, for example, if I'm in traffic and a car cuts me off unexpectedly, I'm very quickly going to start making judgments about that individual. How rude, how arrogant, who does this guy think he is, and just get very personal about my frustrations towards this individual. But if we change the scenario a little bit, and it turns out I'm the one cutting somebody off in traffic, it was simply because he was in my blind spot, or I'm late to my kid's soccer game, or I'm on the way to the emergency room, or it's something outside of me. That's the actor-observer bias in action, and we're just naturally wired in that direction. So given those two things alone, we're working a little bit against our own natural wiring to be self-aware and reflective. But if we go further, there are still some folks out there that believe this to be strictly an HR initiative, a touchy-feely thing, and I've got bigger fish to fry. I don't have time for that. There really isn't much value in that. That's a soft skill hogwash, and I've got problems to solve. Leave me alone. Quite frankly, we all know some of those folks that just haven't necessarily made the connection between their own self-awareness and their ability to be more effective going where they want to go. This is an interesting one that I've seen a lot over the years. When folks are truly willing to invest in being more self-aware, they're also owning the decision to make themselves more vulnerable. For any of you who have gone through a multi-rater feedback, you understand the vulnerability associated with being presented with others' perceptions of you, both good and bad. When we work to really raise our self-awareness, we have to be willing to acknowledge both the good and the bad. And doing that can be a very vulnerable process, and something that not everybody's willing to sign up for. And as we see exemplified in the cartoon here, I want greater self-awareness, but can I continue to be unaware of my bad qualities? If it were always a comfortable kind of pat on the back process to be self-aware, I'm sure we'd see more people doing it. But the reality is, when we look in the mirror, we see things we like and we see things that we don't like. And we have to be willing to be vulnerable in order to do that. Kind of along those same lines, cognitive dissonance, just another little jargon term, but when I look in the mirror and I see something that I don't like, I have to reconcile that with perhaps the way I previously saw myself. So if we go back to the traffic example, if I see myself as being a patient and compassionate guy, and yet I also have thoughts of what an arrogant jerk this guy is for cutting me off, those two thoughts don't add up. There's conflict there. It creates dissonance, creates discomfort, and I've got to figure out a way to reconcile the two. And that's just a lot of psychological effort and work involved in doing that. And if we're being truly committed to self-awareness, it means, again, that we're making ourselves vulnerable to having to see things that we haven't seen before, or accept things that perhaps we didn't want to accept before. And again, not everybody may be willing to sign up for that. Another thing that can interfere with self-awareness is we do have a natural tendency to overestimate ourselves as it relates to being self-aware. More times than not, in my coaching engagements, the leaders that I work with describe themselves as being medium to high self-awareness. And with all respect and credit due them, part of the benefit that they get from the coaching process is that they leave with a much greater self-awareness than they came into the engagement with. And so it's just an example of the fact that we all think we're a little more self-aware than perhaps we are. It's not out of arrogance, it's not out of naivete, but we all just feel like we know ourselves. And sometimes we know ourselves better than others, but this bias towards thinking we know more than we perhaps do can serve as a hurdle to overcome when it comes to really taking the time to dive deeper. And this is what I see most often. We are just super busy, going 20 different directions, and 5 different pulls on our attention and our resources. And many times we just don't feel like we have the time to engage in increasing self-awareness. But more times than not, we're moving so fast we don't even notice the impact that we may be losing because of a lack of self-awareness. And so that's one that I'll kind of comment on a little bit later for sure. But I see that all the time, and I'm sure you could probably resonate with that in your own lives to some degree. I know I can. So I'm going to walk through some simple strategies to help raise self-awareness. But before I get into those specifically, I want to just kind of set the foundation that when somebody makes a commitment to raise self-awareness, they need to do so with these bullets in mind. Working on self-awareness and strengthening self-awareness is about building a skill. And so in the same way we build any other skill, it does take discipline and it does take practice. This is not going to be something that a 90-minute session with a coach or with a mentor can resolve. This is something that you really need to commit to and have discipline in engaging with. That said, you also need to be prepared to be patient. Self-awareness is a process, and it can be a slow process, and sometimes life intervenes and knocks us off track, but we have to be patient, be willing to get back on that track. Acceptance, this is a little bit of a reflection of the vulnerability that I was talking about. The more we can be accepting of what we see in the mirror, the easier it's going to be to actually look in the mirror. And so if we can go into this process as judgment-free as possible, but with more of a learning mindset, the more effective we'll be at increasing self-awareness. Moderation should be pretty straightforward. All good things in moderation, right? Too much of a good thing is no longer a good thing. So this is about raising self-awareness and then using it, leveraging it, interacting with the world, come back and engage in more self-awareness, learn, grow, and then use it and execute and act, and come back and do this over time in moderation. And lastly is this permission. You really want to make sure that you're giving yourself the permission needed to take the time to invest in the process. Again, there are still a lot of folks that feel like this self-awareness is a soft, squishy thing, and I really should be doing things more concrete, more tangible, more spreadsheet oriented, for lack of a better term. So from a leadership standpoint, in the same way folks go to Stanford executive ed classes, folks need to be willing to give themselves permission to engage in the self-awareness development for the purpose of benefiting their own effectiveness and that of the organization going forward. All right, so let's talk some specific strategies here. Self-awareness and building self-awareness really at the core is all about collecting data. Once we collect the data, then we engage in data analysis. And once we analyze that data, then we go to experimenting in our behaviors. So how do we collect data? Well, these are in no particular order, but you're familiar with Peter Drucker, one of the early gurus of management psychology and leadership and organizational development. He has his own method for helping leaders to raise self-awareness. He suggests an example would be when a leader's got a very complex decision to make, that this leader make the decision and then actually write down what he or she expects to happen from this decision. What's the intended outcome? What's the expected outcome? What are the expected impacts? What are the expected consequences of this decision? And then fold it up, put it in an envelope, and then put it in a drawer. And then as much as 9 to 12 months later, go pull that back out, go back to that decision and reflect back on the decision. How accurate was the prediction? And more importantly, where were the gaps in the prediction? In what you predicted happening, did it actually happen? And if so, why? If not, why not? What can we learn from that? And his point was, when we can go back and reflect on major decisions made, the data will eventually aggregate to create patterns and themes. And it's in those patterns and themes, in this case in the way we're thinking or some of the things that influence our thinking, that in turn feed into our self-awareness. So another method here is feedback. Feedback is always a great tool for raising self-awareness. The multi-rater feedback you're all familiar with. That's a great way for raising external feedback, but a well-designed and a well-executed 360 can also be very effective in increasing internal feedback. Internal self-awareness as well. Informal feedback, and what I mean by this is simply listening to what folks have shared with you. Hey Jody, just so you know, you were speaking kind of loudly and quickly during that webinar. What's going on? What do you think's happening there? I don't know. Good question. Let me think on that. Maybe it's a little anxiety, for example, right? But then this anecdotal piece, and this is something that I've found to be very helpful for folks when they can simply reflect back on interactions they've had with different individuals. So for instance, if I go to a networking meeting, let's say over the past couple months, I've gone to 3 different networking meetings. If I were to reflect back on the interactions that I have during those meetings, what did I do well? What did I not do well? How was I feeling during those meetings, during those interactions? What were some of some of my motives? What were some of the thoughts going through my head during those interactions? Again, very quickly, themes and patterns will start to emerge. And those themes and patterns will give me insight about myself, especially as it relates to being in that environment. And the more I can identify those patterns about myself, the more I can leverage those patterns in future interactions. And so that's what I mean by anecdotal feedback. Nobody's necessarily telling me anything, but through my interactions, I'm getting feedback simply from the fact that it's a dynamic interaction. Psychometric assessments, that's pretty straightforward. You're all familiar with personality inventories, temperament inventories, interest inventories. These are objective assessments that simply are designed to help you get a little more insight into your own thoughts, feelings, motives, and values. Embrace adversity. Many times we work very hard to make sure we can stave off mistakes and failure, but as we know, in the real world, that doesn't happen. And so if we're going to have mistakes and if we're going to have failures, the opportunity there is to learn from those. And so actually spending time in that adversity can be very helpful. Learning from it. What happened in this situation? How did we get there? What was my role in this? What did I miss perhaps? What could I have considered differently? What would I have done differently, and why didn't I do it differently? just to kind of do an after-action review or a debrief, a mission debrief, if you will, to better understand how you got there and what your role was in that process. Again, over time, the data will aggregate and create patterns for you. Get outside of your comfort zone. This is pretty straightforward. It's saying, look, through discomfort comes knowledge and growth. You're all familiar with that. If you're in your comfort zone, you're not growing, and you don't grow until you get out of your comfort zone, or whatever that saying is. But if we take a biological approach to it, the human body is built on this premise that things must break before they grow stronger, specifically our bones. Our bones are designed to grow stronger and more dense by actually experiencing these micro fractures all the time. And so when our bones are put under stress and pressure and they experience these micro fractures, they compensate for that by generating more calcium deposits and therefore becoming stronger. When we can put ourselves outside of the familiar, outside of the known, outside of the comfort, it creates a stress and a pressure on us that when we allow ourselves to embrace that stress and learn from it, gives us a chance to increase our self-awareness. Practice mindfulness, and I mean capital M and little m. And when I mean capital M, I'm talking about the formal mindfulness techniques and strategies and approaches that go along with that. The research has really started to evolve as it relates to mindfulness, and it's really starting to be pretty sound in making connections between mindfulness and effective performance. And so certainly I'm an advocate of that, but more importantly, I'm thinking about the little m mindfulness. And what I mean by that is simply taking advantage of brief, unexpected, and even unstructured times to simply reflect. Mindfulness is at its core the practice of thinking about thinking. So reflecting on the course of a day, or reflecting on an interaction that you had, reflecting on a decision you made and why you did it, just to kind of capture the things that are going through your mind, not with judgment, not with critique, but just to better understand what were those pieces. And for my coaching clients, I'll frequently recommend things like using your traffic commute or bathroom time as a time to simply reflect on an interaction or reflect on the day, but engage in lowercase m mindfulness. And then last is leverage mentors. Mentors are folks that are more seasoned or more advanced or more expert, however you want to categorize that, but these are also folks that you trust. And these mentors are not there to necessarily tell you right from wrong, but effective mentors use very challenging and probing questions to get you thinking differently and to get you to be more reflective in understanding your own mindset and your own thoughts and feelings behind things. And so an effective mentor can be a great tool for helping leaders boost self-awareness. But most importantly is this. I said earlier, one of the biggest reasons why we don't find greater self-awareness is because we're just moving too darn fast. One of my favorite movies is this The Hunt for Red October with Sean Connery. And this quote from the movie from Captain Davenport. He was the executive officer for the American sub, for those of you that have seen that movie. He says, well, they're moving at almost 40 knots. At that speed, they could run right over my daughter's stereo and not hear it. That seems to be true for senior leaders particularly. We are moving so fast that self-awareness just doesn't even come into the equation. And I'm moving so fast that even if I were trying to be self-aware, I'd run right over the stereo and not even hear it. So the most important strategy for increasing self-awareness is simply slowing down. This quote from Daniel Goleman: the answer to the question, is what I'm about to do in keeping with my sense of purpose, meaning, and values, doesn't come to us in words. It comes to us via gut sense, and then we put it into words. But that takes time. We've got to allow time for that to be processed and brought into cognition. This quote from Anne Frank: how noble and good everyone could be if, every evening before falling asleep, they were to recall to their minds the events of the whole day and consider exactly what has been good and bad. Then, without realizing it, You try to improve yourself at the start of each new day. You know, again, the point here is when we can simply slow down enough to begin to hear the stereo, then we can make sense out of the music we're listening to, and then we can be more effective in orchestrating our own performance as well as those around us. All right, but too much of a good thing, right? So how much is too much? Well, at the beginning I used the magnifying glass to represent taking a closer look. Go back to your childhood. You remember if you hold the magnifying glass for too long on anything in particular, you're just asking for trouble. Well, such is the case with self-awareness too. We can be too self-aware, or too involved, I should say, in trying to be self-aware. And you know that that's a problem for you when everything seems to be about you. When circumstances or situations or other people's needs or wants or desires, you know, all of a sudden get twisted and translated to have some relevance to you. Perhaps that's a sign that you might be too self-absorbed or getting too wrapped up in trying to be self-aware. What happens too when we get too inward focused is that it makes it hard to connect with others. And so folks will say, you know, you just don't seem like you care much. It doesn't seem like you are really interested in these things. And in return, folks will stop confiding in you. And so you'll see folks will just stop coming by your office, they'll stop talking to you, and they'll stop speaking openly to you. Because either they're going to get a sense that you're not listening, you're not interested, or it'll get turned around to be something about you when really it's not. So all of those should be cues and indicators when you're spending a little too much time navel gazing there or looking inward. The self-conscious versus self-absorbed. Anytime we spend too much effort being inward focused, you're going to end up with one of two results. One is we're self-absorbed, where, as I was mentioning, everything is about you, be it positive or negative. And essentially the world revolves around you, kind of the traditional narcissistic person that perhaps we all know. But the other is this increased self-consciousness. And in many ways, this can create kind of a hyper focus of how you're perceived by others and what's driving your motives and decisions and behaviors from one minute to the next, such that it creates a great deal of insecurity and anxiety and can undermine performance, and at its worst, it can just paralyze a leader in terms of his or her effectiveness. So again, that's the whole reason for moderation. We want to understand ourselves, who we are, why we do what we do from one minute to the next. But if we spend all of our time looking inward, we're bound to walk into a wall at one point or another. So we've gone fairly quickly through this, and it's a lot of information, but there is some time left for questions. If there are any questions, I'd love to field those.
Yes, we do have a question here, Jody, for you, and let me read it to you. It says, is there a difference between organizational self-awareness and individual self-awareness? What if the leader is self-aware but finds his or her organization is not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I were to kind of just react to that question, the difference really is in size and scope of self-awareness. But an organization needs to be self-aware in the same way a leader needs to be self-aware. The challenge is, from a leadership standpoint, there's a saying, as a leader, if you're not driving culture, you're being driven by it. And so if we want a more self-aware culture, then it does become very important that as leaders we are modeling that and reinforcing that within the organization. So in this case, if we have a very self-aware leader, one of the challenges I might invite this leader to reflect on is what is it about him or her and his or her interactions with the other senior leaders in the organization that could be influenced or could be altered, such that there's a greater outcome and appreciation for self-awareness throughout the rest of the organization. Now, none of this is to imply that it's strictly the senior leader's job to make everyone self-aware. But the point there is, it is our job to understand what our impact is, what our role is in shaping the interactions and dynamics of those around us. So in this case, If the leader is espousing the values of self-awareness and is embracing for him or herself self-awareness, but the environment and the culture is not, there's a disconnect between intent and impact from the organization standpoint. And that would be a great chance for the leader to reflect and try to better understand why that is, recognize the patterns, and then come at it from a more tactical or a different tactical approach.
Another question was, is it ever too late to approach someone to ask for feedback?
Is it ever too late to approach someone to ask for feedback?
Yeah, would there maybe be a statute of limitations of sorts in asking for feedback on a particular event, perhaps, or interaction?
In the spirit of, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, let me come at it from this angle. If I'm seeking feedback from somebody, I do want it to be about something that's fairly close in time. I don't want to be asking somebody for feedback that happened, a month ago or 6 months ago, or certainly any longer than that. Simply because if I want honest feedback, I need folks to really be able to recall valid data, which includes their experience and their thoughts and feelings at the time. So if I really want somebody's feedback, then asking for it sooner rather than later would be helpful. From a general standpoint, is it ever too late to ask for feedback? My answer is a firm absolutely not. Feedback is it's the seed for growth from the time we start walking to the time we stop walking. To be honest with you, it's through feedback that we can better inform our own insights. And when we have more informed insights internally, we're more empowered to make choices that will help us get where we're trying to go.
Great answer. Thank you, Jody. That does conclude the questions we have for today. Again, anyone, if you do have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Jody's contact information is right here on the last slide. We're happy to continue this conversation offline. And I do want to thank Jody so much for his time today and everyone for attending this afternoon. We really appreciate your attendance.
Thank you all.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.